At this moment, I'd like to introduce you to physician and parent Dr. Elizabeth Doherty, whose son Danny is an Allegro student and participates in Allegro's programs on a weekly basis, as all of our students do. She would like to share a few words with us about what Allegro has meant to Danny and her family. Please welcome Dr. Elizabeth Doherty.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Sprinkle, and thank you, Mr. Sabatis, and all of your guests. Mr. Sabatis, you and your friends are doing such an amazing thing, making a real, live, true miracle happen with children. I want to tell you a story about one of those children. I wish I could show you pictures to go along with the story. Some of them would make you smile and some of them would make you cry. But we don't have pictures, so you'll have to use your imagination while I tell you my story. This story is about my fourth child, Danny. The first picture I want you to imagine is a tiny, tiny premature baby on a table in the neonatal intensive care unit. I have this picture engraved on my heart the first time I got to see him after he was born. He was lying there with so many tubes and wires, and he was on a ventilator with a tube to breathe. And I could see him crying, but it was silent. His cries were silenced by this tube. And I just sat there and I cried right along with him. I wasn't even allowed to touch him because he was so sick and fragile that even being held by his mom was more stress than he could survive. I need to share this with you. Danny makes me cry. Way more than all of his siblings put together. That time in the NICU wasn't the last tears I shed for that boy. That first picture we imagined of the tiny baby in the NICU, just crying silently around that ventilator tube, was really the beginning. Danny grew and eventually got out of the neonatal ICU, home for just a few days, to turn right around and end up in terrible congestive heart failure, back on the ventilator again in the pediatric ICU. Even his bone marrow shut down. That's when he started to get the brain damage that's caused his cerebral palsy. It turns out that the prematurity wasn't his big problem. He has a metabolic disorder. Every single one of his cells is missing an enzyme that helps him metabolize amino acids that are found in foods with protein or even in his own muscles. And that builds up and that's caused continued brain damage. So now I want you to picture this. A little blonde third grader. He looks just like all of his older brothers at that age. But in this picture of this third grader, I want you to see that he has oxygen taped to his face and he has a feeding tube permanently implanted in his abdomen, his braces on his legs. And in the picture in your mind, I want you to see his wheelchair. It's black and it's a sports chair. And he can do really fast 360s all by himself. We walk him back and forth to school and the way home is all downhill. And I want you in the picture to imagine this third grader going way too fast down the hill and making me really nervous every afternoon. Danny is 8 years old now. For a while now, he's been able to get out of his chair, first with a walker and now all by himself, better every year. He still uses his chair to get back and forth to school and for big adventures. Like for him, going to the grocery store is a big adventure. You know, for some kids, kids who are hooked up to oxygen and heart monitors and things, going to the grocery store really is an adventure. And that's another thing about Danny that makes me cry. I mean, the things that he hasn't been able to do because he's medically fragile and because of his disabilities. And he's not on scouts, he's not on a soccer team, he can't even go to play dates without me or one of his nurses. But considering everything, he's doing great, thanks to years and years of therapy. But we have to talk about therapy. He has physical therapy to get him walking and occupational therapy to help him hold, his pencil and speech therapy. And for Danny, coordinating eating and talking all at the same time is a major, big deal. And while we're talking about therapy, part of Danny's life for the past 3 years has been chemotherapy for me as I've faced invasive breast cancer. And so, Mr. Sabatis and your friends, I want you to know that if you're a third grade boy, therapy is a bad word. I mean, therapy means there's something wrong with you. regular kids, the kind of kids that he goes to school with, and his brothers and his sister, they don't go to therapy. They play sports and they're on teams. Only people with something wrong with them, like CP or cancer or something, go to therapy. So let's go back to our story. I want you to imagine another picture. I want you to imagine this third grader who decided that he was breathing very well. And one day he decided he wanted to walk to the cafeteria in school instead of going in his chair. And he has a feeding tube, and he's attached to a pumper machine all night long, but he's doing some eating during the day, with therapy, of course, that bad word. So anyway, in your picture, I want you to imagine this very strong little third grader who convinces his nurse that not only he's going to walk to the cafeteria, but he's going to carry his own tray like all the other third graders. You know, Danny's the only handicapped kid at his school, and they're very supportive of him, but kids are kids. And when Danny came home that day and told me about falling with his tray in the cafeteria in front of all the other kids, it just broke my heart. I mean, one more time he made me cry, but this time he was crying too. Mom, he said, and I want you to imagine now this little boy in his bed he's hooked up to his oxygen and his heart monitors and his tube feeding pumper, and picture me trying to navigate through all this so I could just lay down and hold my baby. And I want you to imagine Danny saying, Mom, I hate falling. I fall all the time. I said, that's true. You know, if you want to be out of your chair, it's true. And I told him I was sorry. I'm really sorry, Danny, because I couldn't think of anything else to say. But then he said, Mom, you know, I'm the slowest person in my whole school, and there's 4-year-olds in my school. He said, Mom, I hate having CP. And so he cried, and I cried, and then it got worse. Because he said to me, Mom, you know how there's physical therapy for moving and occupational therapy for making your hands go and stuff? Mom, he said, is there some kind of therapy for your heart when you're just so sad and nothing can fix your CP? And I said, yeah, Danny, I'm going to find you that right kind of therapy. And I held him and I rubbed his back until he fell asleep. Then I navigated my way out of his tubes and oxygen, and I got to work. I was going to fix this. Like, time to do some research. Whatever this mama needed to do to fix this grieving, broken-hearted little boy who didn't want to have CP anymore, that's what our family was going to do. So I gave the whole thing over to the Lord in prayer, and I got to work. And I thought about it, and I thought that Danny's grief and what bothered him the most was about moving. It was about his body moving in space. It wasn't the medical issues and the tubes and always being short of breath. It was kinetic. It was energy in motion. It's what it all boiled down to. But I knew in my heart that therapy wasn't the answer. We'd been doing that with the very, very best people. And besides, this was an issue of the heart. And remember, therapy is a bad word when you're a third grade boy. So I got on the internet and I thought, did you know that if you Google movement and education and not therapy in Charlotte, North Carolina, you can learn about the Allegro Foundation? So, oh my gosh, I sat there at the computer and I read all about Pat Farmer and her research and her work on movement education, and I knew right then that it could be totally transformative for my child. They accepted medically fragile children because they accept all children. And they were right there at the hospital, and that helped my peace of mind. And I called them that next morning, and they had a spot for my baby. And I had chemotherapy that day, so it took about 48 hours to get the paperwork from the pediatrician and all of that. But 48 hours from that totally broken-hearted moment, I had hope. I had enough hope that I was able to tell Danny and all of his siblings about it. I mean, what an awesome thing to be able to tell your children about getting an answer to a prayer, and not just like a sort of answer. I mean, exactly the answer. Exactly. It was kinetic and movement, and it was education, and it was not therapy, and it was a team, and it was a class. I mean, it was exactly perfect for this little boy that I love so much. You know how if you look back at a series of pictures of something that has changed over time, that the change is more obvious than just while you're watching it? If you were to look at the pictures from when Danny started with the Allegro Foundation in the fall, the first thing you would notice is the smile. You know, my primary goal was to stop the tears. I had enough tears, fix the grief, and that was instant. I mean, with the very first class. I think mostly it was the impact of his peers in the class with him. I mean, just imagine how huge it is for a little kid to have totally cool big kids who also have CP and other disabilities, but handle it with grace, to look up to. I mean, I hadn't even realized that was missing from my Danny's life, but Pat Farmer and the Allegro Foundation, they knew it, and what an amazing thing for these kids. And then for to have true peer role models for these little kids, but even, I think it's amazing for these big kids. It's gotta be very significant for a disabled teenager to have a chance to be a role model, to be the totally cool kid that the little guys look up to. So we fixed the tears, and I thought that was gonna be the hardest part, and it was just instant. But then came the physical changes. These were more subtle, I think. He sat up straighter in his chair, and when he sat straighter, he could use his breathing muscles better, and he needed a little bit less oxygen, and he could go longer times without his oxygen, and he started falling less. We knew this for certain. His nurse at school documents all of his falls, and the numbers came down. And the Allegro Foundation movement education classes was the only thing that changed. So we knew that had to be why. And the self-esteem, even just within our family. Mr. Sabatis, I know you and your guests, they know about having kids and grandchildren on sports teams. Can you imagine what a big deal it was for Danny to say to his brother, sorry, Mom can't carpool you to soccer, I have Allegro. I mean, that's normal kid stuff. That's not therapy. But the next big transformative moment came with tears again. And I do have a picture. It is on my phone. It is just amazing. Before Danny and my cancer, I was a family practice doctor, and I've studied neurodevelopmental issues for years and years. I'm almost embarrassed I hadn't figured this out. But sometimes it's only when you look at the pictures afterwards, that you realize. But it happened at the dress rehearsal for tonight, on Wednesday night, right here. My baby, my Danny was moving. And I know this might not sound like a big deal, but for him it was huge. There he was, not only standing, but standing on one leg and kicking the other leg across to the other side. It's called a cross midline. When you think about it, it's a miracle for any of us that our brains can coordinate things on both sides of our bodies. It's this electrical phenomenon. I mean, anatomically speaking, moving any part of your body is amazing. But for Danny's legs at 8.5 years old, it was brand new. I don't want to bore you with neuroanatomy lessons, but if you go to the Allegro Foundation website, you can learn all this cool stuff about what happens to children brain-wise when they can work across midline. I mean, major research stuff, cognitive changes, social changes, not just movement. The Allegro Foundation has done great research on the results of their work, and they explain it in a very straightforward way. Danny is my computer man, and he has read every word. But the important part is this. I need you to understand one thing. I'm not gonna cry. The Allegro Foundation, Pat Farmer, and Movement Education, what I saw on Wednesday night, it was proof. They have, in less than 1 year, changed the actual structure of my child's brain. I had read the research, but now I have irrefutable proof in a picture on my phone. I stood there and cried. I mean, I just stood right over there and just wept. We had sought help from the Allegro Foundation to heal my son's grief, and they did that. But they have also started the even more amazing process of healing his damaged neurons. You have done that with your support. You have healed my baby's broken heart, and you are changing his brain. And for that, I am so grateful. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.